This joint hearing of the subcommittees on general farm commodities and risk management and livestock and foreign agriculture, entitled to review the implementation of federal farm and disaster relief, will come to order. Thank you and welcome to this joint hearing of the subcommittees on general farm commodities and risk management and livestock and foreign agriculture. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague and fellow chairman, Mr. Costa, as well as my esteemed ranking member, Mr. Thompson, and the Livestock and Foreign Affairs ranking member, Mr. Rouser. Welcome also to our chairman, Colin Peterson, and my fellow Texan ranking member, Mike Conaway. This first joint hearing comes at a very important time for farmers. USDA, and in particular, the Food Production and Conservation Mission Area and the Farm Service Agency, is in the middle of a huge job. FPAC and FSA are currently at the helm of three critical but separate efforts to address the needs of farmers, ranchers, and rural communities in our country. The Market Facilitation Program, which is meant to assist those farmers most directly harmed by the administration's trade war, the Expanded Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program, or WHIP Plus, which will aid in rural recovery from natural disasters, and programs like ARC, PLC, DMC, and other supports within Title I of the Farm Bill, which provide a risk management framework for farmers and ranchers. It's our job on this committee to ensure that these programs are structured and implemented in a way that can quickly, efficiently, and most directly serve the farmers, ranchers, and small towns who need them right now. It's also our job to ensure that these programs are implemented in a way that is fair, transparent, and consistent with the law. We can absolutely get farmers the help they need while still conducting appropriate and necessary oversight. I do have concerns about the path that USDA is on, especially when it comes to staffing. I hear from farmers all the time about understaffed local FSA offices. Resources at FSA are stretched thin, and I'd like to hear today what plans USDA has to make sure these resources are managed effectively. On top of that, there are many media stories about software glitches and unprepared staff struggling to process these disaster payments. It's clear that USDA wants to find efficiencies, but is USDA prepared to make the changes needed to successfully deliver these important services, even if that means increasing, not decreasing, staff and resources? I look forward to hearing your testimony today, Mr. Undersecretary. I now recognize Chairman Peterson for an opening statement. You wave. I recognize Ranking Member Conaway for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this really important hearing and having us focus on the way that USDA is going about its business of trying to help farmers and ranchers in rural America across this country. But at a junction when it's really difficult, when the chairman mentioned everything that's going on, the process we've gone through the last 8 days on the CR is shameful. It's one thing for Xi Jinping to use our farmers and ranchers in rural America as a weapon against President Trump in those trade negotiations, but it's entirely something else to have the powers of this body be using those same good people as leverage because you simply don't like President Trump. Now, this committee and the USDA yeoman's work at trying to make sure that rural America is protected, that we eliminate the uncertainties that they live out there that we can. The way that the majority has gone away about this CR and taken the CCC funding hostage is now using those folks as a weapon. Shame on us for allowing that to happen. It should never have happened. We are reducing this body to a terrible state. It's one thing for one of our colleagues to list donors of President Trump to try to harass their businesses and hurt them financially. It's entirely different for this body to do the exact same thing with this funding mechanism that has always gone forward without impediments. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle might say that this has been done before. The restrictions placed on this funding as a result of the Blanche Lincoln and Vilsack efforts affected future promises, not the current promises that were made at that point in time. These promises on the MFB payments, the disaster relief, have been made. And for us to threaten rural America that those payments would not go out under regular order is terrible. Shame on us for getting that to that exact same thing. So my colleagues will say we fixed it, but you didn't. You left restrictions on there. There's a report that USDA has to do in the face of all the things that the chairman said they had to get done. Now we've added another report due by October 30th, or 31st, to that workload. and shame on us for doing that. We've also not fully funded it. We've given it some sort of date certain funding as opposed to moving it to the $30 billion. So from now on, congratulations. From now on, as my chairman said yesterday on the radio, from now on, this process will now be a weapon that both sides can use if they think it's to their advantage. And shame on us for being to do that. And I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
I recognize Chairman Peterson.
So I want to tell members that haven't been here 29 years some of the history. This was put in place by the Republican Party in 2010. And it was put in place, this restriction, because at that time the Republicans thought that Secretary Vilsack was using the CCC to help Blanche Lincoln, who at the time was chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, in her re-election because there was a disaster in Arkansas. And the Senate wouldn't do a disaster bill because she was up for election. So what happened? So what they did instead is they put a limitation on Vilsack so he couldn't use the CCC to do it. So you guys put it in place, not us. And, well, no. And so what's happened ever since is the Appropriation Committee has waived that provision. You know, they didn't change it, but they waived it. Okay. So this time it became an issue. There wasn't a single member on this committee, the Ag Committee, that had anything to do with this. You know, period. And so I object to making these kind of accusations that our members somehow or another were complicit in this. We were not. And I found out this came from the Senate. It did not come from the House. This whole the brouhaha came out of the Senate. So, you know, whatever it is, you know, my concern about this and what I said on the radio yesterday is, and this is legitimate, there weren't a handful of members that understood what the CCC was before this all started. You know, and that's not just this latest dust-up. You know, the president using this fund for farmers has elevated this thing. And so now I've had people talk to me from the liberal side, you know, complaining about it, that never knew there was a CCC, never knew how it operated. And then yesterday, the Freedom Caucus, they're starting to weigh into this thing. So that's what I'm concerned about, you know. But it's nothing, nobody on this committee had anything to do with that. You know, and without this committee, this thing might have happened, you know, and it wasn't the House that was pushing this, it was the Senate, you know, and that's where these troubles usually start. So I just wanted to clear the record.
Now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, ranking member of the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management Subcommittee, Mr. Thompson, for his opening remarks.
Chairman Vella, Chairman Costa, thank you for holding this important hearing regarding implementation of the 2018 Farm Bill provisions and disaster assistance. And thank you to Undersecretary Northey for your leadership, for attending, and for providing us an update on the status of these important policies. As those of us representing rural America know firsthand, times are tough in farm country. And over the past few years, it seems like there isn't a single region of the country that's immune from Mother Nature's devastation. Not only are producers having to grapple with extreme weather, they're also being buffeted by bad markets and ever-changing landscape for global trade, not to mention the policy uncertainty coming out of Washington. That's why it is so important to get the 2018 Farm Bill completed without the threat of extensions, which would only have exacerbated the challenges facing farmers and ranchers. And I'm very pleased with the timely rollout from USDA of the key Farm Bill programs, despite having numerous other policies to implement, which I'm sure we'll hear about more today. House Republicans were able to make some key targeted improvements to the farm safety nets, which should not be overlooked. And do not forget, in conference, we were having to negotiate against a Senate bill that would have cut $700 million out of the baseline of these critical programs. Talk about kicking farmers and farm families when they're down. And it's unconscionable to me that people would be advocating for the erosion of the safety net at a time when producers are looking for any lifeline available to keep their family farms in business. Now, I'm proud that we were able to hold the line and produce a conference report that provides improvements to all Title I programs to the benefit of all crops and regions of the country. One additional area where Congress could act now to ease the concerns of the agriculture community would be to act swiftly to approve the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which made key improvements to NAFTA and is expected to provide $2.2 billion in additional exports for our producers, particularly for dairy, the main commodity produced in my district. Now, beyond the access that it provides, USMCA also sends a signal to other trading partners currently in talks with USTR that the United States has the wherewithal to follow through on commitments made, which will lead to other opportunities to expand trade, just like what we saw with the agreement in principle reached with Japan. Congress must approve USMCA now, and failure to do so will erode relationships between our negotiating partners, not just for this administration, but for all future administrations as well. Thanks again for holding this joint hearing, and I look forward to hearing from Undersecretary Northey about the actions USDA is taking to aid our farmers and ranchers.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important that these two subcommittees meet together this morning. This hearing that deals with the review of the implementation of the Federal Farm and Disaster Program is fitting and appropriate given the challenges that we're facing today in farm country. And for all of the members that are participating, I thank you. I also want to note that it was important that Chairman Peterson clarify the history and the record as it relates to these activities that were most recently involved with the continuing resolution that we need to pass this week, and that we need to obviously have a budget because, frankly, it's irresponsible to shut down government. I've always felt it's irresponsible, and past actions by previous Congresses to do just that for political agendas is inappropriate, period. And certainly, I think the President learned that lesson the hard way last year. At least I hope he did. The history of the CCC, which, as the Chairman Peterson pointed out, is really not known by the majority of members of Congress until this last week, is important to note because, frankly, we should not be politicizing this. It's not the part of this committee. My sense is it really came from the Senate as well, but we have to deal with it. So what we're dealing with today is to talk about where the safety net is. Where's the safety net for farmers and ranchers and dairy people across this country? And as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Livestock, I'm very interested in overseeing that the new dairy margin coverage program that we worked so hard on in the reauthorization of the last Farm Bill and the administration's market facilitation program is properly implemented. And that's why we have the Secretary here today in part. The dairy margin coverage sign-up for 2019 was set to end tomorrow. Now, I think it's important that we give dairy men and women every opportunity to sign up for this program. We'll be asking the Secretary where we are in terms of that sign-up and whether or not your numbers kind of coincide with the numbers that I've heard. I hope there can be a little bit of flexibility with that deadline tomorrow. This year, given that we have a brand new program. But at the same time, I know you get the challenge because we get to sign up for the 2020 program. So I'm sympathetic to the challenge that the department is facing in that instance. But it's been tough in dairy country across the land. We know the large fluctuations in the amount of dairies that have gone bankrupt and have been sold in every region of America, and we certainly have lost our fair share in California. I know dairymen and women that have been there for generations that now find themselves having to sell the dairy, and it's tough, and it has economic ramifications in the communities where those dairies have been. Nationwide, though, the program, I think, in terms of success, has triggered, I'm told, over $1 billion in help, $250 million, excuse me, let me correct that, $250 million in help to dairy farmers throughout the country, and that's good. That's obviously what the intention was. I have a difference with the administration, with the President on this tariff war. I've been clear about that. The President has said that farmers are better off with market facilitation program payments than they were with the access they had to China before the trade war. I think in the USMCA, we've made some headway with Canada on that Section 7. I can tell you the dairy market's very important for California and Mexico. But yet, when I talk to farmers, it's not just my disagreement with this, that no one wins a tariff war because everybody has leverage, but farmers in California are feeling the pain of it, and they agree. They think that it's important that they have access to markets and they maintain those markets, and they're very fearful when we lose these markets because of this current trade war, we may never regain them, and that is a concern I have. So the market facilitation program and how those monies are used for the payments really don't come close. I mean, the example in dairy, 12 cents per hundredweight. I mean, you're getting $16 to $18 per hundredweight, 12 cents, you know, it's in the margins. It may stave off a bankruptcy or a foreclosure by a bank for a certain time period, but 12 cents per hundredweight is not going to save a dairy. So I don't know what the USDA leadership thinks. I'm interested. I've got a few questions on how the market facilitation program was set up and how you're implementing it. But Chairman Vella, thank you for agreeing to host this joint hearing with me. Secretary Northey, you've got a farm background. You know how difficult it is in farm country. And we appreciate your participation here this morning to give us a sense of with your testimony, where we're going with this. So I now yield back, I guess, to the ranking member of our subcommittee, my subcommittee, Mr. Rausser, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a prepared statement that I'll just submit for the record, and just have a couple of comments for the sake of time, because I'm interested in getting to the real meat of the matter here. But first, I think it's important that we recognize just how critical it is that we in agriculture stick together, Republican and Democrat. It is unfortunate that so many of our other colleagues that don't have the opportunity to represent rural areas, you know, the lack of understanding of agriculture is significant. There's a wide gap there, and of course that's not uncommon around the countryside either. You know, most folks have no idea where their food and fiber comes from. We take it for granted every single day of our lives, and so I think it's really important that we as Republicans and Democrats on this committee, you know, stick together and promote and educate and cajole and persuade as best we can our other members of Congress so that they will understand the nature and the gravity of what we're dealing here with as it relates to production agriculture, and clearly a country that can feed itself and clothe itself is in a very enviable position, enables us to be prosperous here at home and strong abroad as well. The other thing I'd like to mention, and I've been around agriculture in these debates for a long time, going back to my days on the Senate staff, and back then I never understood why we didn't have some type of, in addition to crop insurance, some type of catastrophic fund of some sort so that when these disasters hit, we're not waiting on Congress for 8 months or 12 months or 14 months or whatever it may be, but have a program in place similar to what we have with FEMA, where Congress makes an appropriation every year and you have it there, and when a disaster hits, you have a base, and then if you need to come back and supplement that, you know, Congress can. And so very clearly, as valuable as crop insurance is, you take a situation in my home state of North Carolina, you have economic losses year after year after year. That's the hurricane of economics, so to speak. And then you have the weather hurricanes coming through that absolutely devastate your areas. Farmers have millions and millions of dollars tied up in the ground. Hurricane hits in early September, and they don't even have an opportunity to get anything from that investment. And meanwhile, it comes at a time when they've lost all their equity due to the economic hardships that they have faced over a period of time. And then it takes Congress months to get any kind of disaster aid package across the finish line for a variety of reasons. And I just think we've got to, and this has been an age-old problem, we got to come up with a better solution than what we have now. Crop insurance is very valuable. It's very helpful. But you know, there are so many times we face when, you know, it's just not quite enough. And we've got to have extra help. So that's where we are. I look forward to your testimony, Mr. Northey, and look forward to questions and answers. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, each of you, for your views on the current conditions facing agriculture in your state and across this country. I would like to request that opening statements by other members be submitted for the record so the witness may begin his testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. We would like to welcome our witness, the Honorable Bill Northey, Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation at USDA. Mr. Northey is a fourth-generation farmer from Iowa and served as Iowa Secretary of Agriculture from 2006 to 2018. Undersecretary Northey, please begin when you are ready.
Very good, thank you. Chairman Vela, Chairman Costa, Ranking Members Thompson and Rouser, and distinguished members of the committee. I am honored to be with you this morning to discuss the work USDA has accomplished and continues to deliver as we implement the 2018 Farm Bill. Thank you for your leadership in providing the programs and the funding authority that lets us support our nation's hardworking farmers, ranchers, and forest stewards. I'm privileged to be the Undersecretary for FPAC, comprised of the three farmer-facing agencies of FSA, RMA, and NRCS. Since Congress passed and President Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill into law last December, one of our highest priorities has been implementing the Dairy Margin Coverage Program. Sign up for DMC began June 17th, and FSA began making payments for the DMC on July 11th. As of last evening, we had over 21,000 producers enrolled in the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, with about $230 million being paid to ensure that our producers have enough time to enroll. We are extending the deadline from September 20th to September 27th, so 1 week. Our FSA offices have and will continue to make the extra effort to ensure producers are notified of the approaching deadline. We made phone calls and sent out postcards and emails. Additionally, producer organizations and cooperatives have been important partners in sharing program information and deadlines, and we'll continue to work with them to do so with this new deadline. FSA has implemented the 2018 Farm Bill changes to ARC PLC as well. ARC PLC sign-up began September 3rd for the 2019 program and will run through next March. And RMA has implemented key crop insurance provisions, including multi-county enterprise units, and provided insurance options for grazing and harvesting of wheat. RMA will provide coverage for hemp in crop year 2020. On the conservation side, we've held sign-ups for continuous enrollment CRP and the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and FSA is planning a CRP general sign-up in December, with their CRP grassland sign-up to follow that. On September 3rd, we published an announcement of funds availability for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And additionally, NRCS has implemented EQIP, CSP, and the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program in accordance with the existing regulations as prescribed by 2018 Farm Bill. New regulations will be published soon for implementation of those programs in 2020, fiscal year 2020. This past year has tested the resilience of America's farmers. Crop insurance, supplemental natural disaster assistance programs, and short-term trade mitigation programs have helped producers manage those challenges. To help producers who were unable to plant crops or had significant delays in planting, USDA increased some flexibility in some of the program rules and its delivery by allowing earlier harvest of cover crops on prevent plant acres, by extending the filing deadline for acreage reporting, by providing equipped cover crop cost share for prevent plant acres, and by deferring interest charges on crop insurance premiums. We took these actions based on comments we received from you, from farm organizations, and directly from producers. I also know there's a lot of interest in the implementation of the Supplemental Disaster Relief Bill. Last week, we announced FSA's WHIP Plus program, which provides payments to producers for natural disasters occurring in 2018 and 2019. We began accepting payments, but also included in that, in addition to the WHIP Plus, is payments for milk loss, for stored grain losses, and for 2017 peach and blueberry freeze losses. In addition, all producers with flooding or excess moisture-related prevent plant claims in 2019 will receive a top-up payment of 10 to 15% of their indemnity. We're providing relief through the Emergency Conservation Program, the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, and the Emergency Watershed Program, which were provided $1.5 billion in the Disaster Relief Bill. The Market Facilitation Program, part of President Trump's support package for farmers, will provide up to $14.5 billion in direct payments to agriculture producers who have been affected by unjustified retaliatory tariffs on U.S. farm goods. Sign-up began July 29th and will run through December 6th. As of the beginning of this week, we had more than 346,000 applications, and $4 billion have been paid to producers. In February 2018, USDA launched farmers.gov, a mobile-friendly website making it easier for producers to apply for programs, process transactions, sign documents, and access their information. They can also access a farm loan and assistance discovery tool, disaster assistance discovery tool there. And we began accepting debit card payments online as well, and there's more to come. Before I close, I'd like to acknowledge this particularly challenging time, as you all have noted, for our agricultural producers. At FPAC, our agencies are working hard to ensure producers have what they need to help manage their risks and their land. I want to thank our thousands of USDA employees who serve our nation's farmers, ranchers, and forest stewards daily for their hard work implementing the 2018 Farm Bill and other programs. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate the members' understanding. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Northey, having just passed a farm bill, one of my primary concerns is assuring that all the programs we paid for are fully and accurately administered. I know this is a priority for you as well in providing excellent customer service for farmers and ranchers. I'm aware that you have made a significant investment in a comprehensive workload analysis to determine the number of staff required for optimal efficiency, giving states the ability to make decisions regarding staff placement and office leases, for example. Right now, we know that field office staffing is down from 11,000 in 2003 to about 8,500 employees currently. What is the target number of employees contained in the workload analysis, and are we even close?
So overall, certainly what the staffing model has allowed us to do to be able to look at those areas that we're the most short in staff, and for us to be able to fill those areas first. We are targeting every dollar that we have in salaries and expense from appropriations to be able to use that for staffing levels. And so ideally, the model says we should have a lot more folks than what we have right now. We have a lot of work that's being done out there. I don't know that we'll ever have the funding to be able to get back to the levels we were in staffing 8 or 10 years ago. We're going to be as efficient with those staff as we can. We are right now staffed across our 3 agencies about 90% of what our ceiling is, about what the dollars are that we have for each of those agencies. And we're working hard to get that closer to the 100%. So we're working to staff up. We certainly have burdened those folks with several activities including activities in excess of the Farm Bill activities that you've had. But these are important programs to deliver. We've looked at trying to improve our software as well to be able to make sure that that works as easy as we can. As we looked at delivering the market facilitation program, we looked at trying to make that as easy for our producers as well as our staff to be able to deliver. And I think some of those things are helping. Certainly some online activities. We don't expect all producers to use our services online. But having access to that will allow producers to sign some documents, save some miles coming in, and save some time at the counter as well.
So what is that staff ceiling number?
The staff ceiling number is about, I can get those numbers exactly for you, but it's about 10,000 for FSA. We're around 9,000 right now for FSA.
Fair enough. One last question. Can you explain the rationale for the timing of the agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage election and enrollment process? As I understand it, farmers and landowners can go to their FSA county office today and make the election for 2019 and 2020. However, they can only enroll for the 2019 program right now because enrollment for 2020 does not begin until October 7th. Is that the best way to describe the situation, or maybe more open-ended? Can you describe what's happening in that regard?
It is. We're taking sign up for 2018 or 2019 right now. We'll start sign up for 2020 in the midst of this, and I don't remember that date. I believe it is October. And so we'll have folks that will be able to come in and sign up for both, but right now we're taking that 2019 sign up. That sign up will continue through March.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Peterson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you say madam?
Pardon? So I have a couple of questions, but one of the things you said got me concerned, that you're going to have crop insurance for hemp. And I guess that was ordered in the Farm Bill or something, or in some place. I've been investigating this, and I'm going to be doing more the next couple of weeks, but I don't see how in the world you're going to come up with a product for hemp, given what I've found out about it. Do you think you're going to be able to do this?
Certainly, you hint at the challenge. The challenge is coming up with a product that fairly represents the risk, understanding how it should be priced.
Good luck.
So right now, what we will offer for sure is the ability to include it in whole farm revenue protection. That's a policy that includes all crops on a farm. And in that case, we typically will just work with folks that have a history of growing it. So in that case, we'd have some previous revenue from that farm. There is some folks that are looking at coming up with individual policies. They're diving into some of the information coming from those areas where they have been growing hemp, but
Well, after my next couple, 3 weeks of exploration, I'll have a report for you, okay? So, so the question I have is about the staffing situation. As I understand it, I don't understand it. Apparently, I'd heard that you guys asked under the budget for additional resources or positions or something, or that the budget said that you should have additional positions or resources, but then when you asked for the appropriation, you did not include that. So going back in history, we had 11,500 people working at FSA offices in 2004. Today, we have 8,500. I would argue we got more work today than we had in 2004. So in my area, I've got people now that are They've turned offices into kind of a part-time office, and the CED, like in my county where I go, is now spending a day or two a week in the county next door because they've turned it into a part-time office that I think is only open a couple days a week. You know, when he comes down from that other county to staff it, I think he even brings people from that other office with him, you know, to staff it at the time. This county that was gone part-time is a completely agriculture county. There's nothing else there in the county. You know, and I don't understand how all this happens, but my concern is that we don't have the staffing out there that we need you know, and I don't know if you asked for it and didn't get it, or whether you got some other plan going on here that we're not up to speed on, you know, or I don't see how this is going to work, you know. Do you have some magic bullet here that I don't know about?
Well, there certainly is no magic bullet in being able to serve all the needs out there. We do use as much technology as we can, but you know that it's the budgeting process is a challenging process. It's about making lots of choices. You all deal with it as well, and being able to look at where you have funds available. We'd sure gladly use more folks if there were more dollars to be able.
Did you ask for more
folks?
Did you ask for more dollars? The administration asked for more?
Been lots of proposals inside and outside, and certainly we have our process of being able to sort through the priorities at USDA and through the president's budget, as well as you all have your priorities and what you need to work through. So we're looking to do everything we can to stretch the resources that we're giving as far as we can.
No, I'm sure you are. But they also have this optimal productivity office report that I guess Accenture is doing or something. Yeah, they're doing some kind of study of your offices and.
Yes, and so.
But that hasn't been completed yet, as I understand it.
Yeah, that's ongoing. We actually do time studies all the time to be able to understand what programs are taking the most time, what offices and areas are seeing an increase in time. Certainly, one of those challenges are disaster programs. Those occur infrequently. You can't really staff for those, so you end up really challenged in areas where you have disaster on top of the other programs. But this is a way for us to be able to measure the workload at each of these offices, look across the state, for example, across Minnesota, and see which offices are the most short in staffing and make sure that we staff there first with the available people that we have.
Well, somehow or another, I think we're going to have more people in these offices if we keep having disaster programs and facilitation programs, and you know, the workload is just a lot. You know, the new dairy program. I mean, it's a lot of things we didn't have before. And these studies, you know, give me one more minute. We were up on the northern border because the Customs Border Patrol did a study of the time, you know, the people going across the border and all this stuff. And they went and closed my borders there on a U.S. highway. They went from closing at 10 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So I got people working on both sides of the border. Canada's at midnight, and we're at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So people come to work, can't get back home. You know, it's just crazy. And there was one of these studies that did that caused them, they claim, to make these changes. You know, and so they have 9 places in North Dakota that have like 20% of the crossings that we have. They left them open until 10 o'clock. You know, I mean, I don't know. So I'm skeptical of all these studies, but I hope we can work together to get more people out there because I think we're short. So
appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
And I recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Conaway, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I share Chairman Peterson's concerns over hemp. I worry we've opened Pandora's box. As an example, as I understand it, if a hemp plant is stressed through drought or lack of water, the THC levels skyrocket. And so we're going to be insuring an illegal product if we're covered by crop insurance. And so lots of unanswered questions in that arena. I share that. Mr. Northey, on the implementation side, in the 14th Farm Bill, I think we allocate some extra $100 million specifically for implementation of the Farm Bill. Colin and I, at the last final days of that effort, worked really hard to get, I think we mounted up maybe $15 million. The Senate was willing to go to zero, and Colin and I fought for some additional monies to help you get that. Can you talk to us a little bit about where the stresses and strains are with respect to the implementation of the 18th Farm Bill and what areas you might need some help in?
Thank you. Certainly the $100 million was beneficial and used and needed and mostly used for software and outreach, some additional staffing as well. In this case, having $15 million, we needed to go and use some of our other resources to do some of the IT work and some of the staffing. So we had some other activities we were working on that we needed to prioritize the Farm Bill implementation. Certainly needed to do the IT work for that, and so we would reallocate resources to be able to try and get that done.
Can you talk to us about a specific area of the 18 Farm Bill that is where the choke points are right now remaining at this point?
Yeah, so the Farm Bill was our priority, so we pulled things away from the other things that we were doing, other modernization of some of our software and other kinds of things. So we haven't slowed any of the Farm Bill process down, but we had some ideas about other things that we were going to do that we needed to be able to use the resources for the Farm Bill. It is our priority to get out, and that's the number one activity.
So, but what I'm hearing, though, is you've got other areas that should have been attended to in moving forward in your normal course of business that have suffered as a result of the lack of resources that our Senate colleagues were willing to pitch in on. So, well, I want to publicly thank Chairman Peterson for his help on trying to get the 15 that we got. It was hard to do and dramatically short of the 100 plus that was allocated in 2014. Mr. Northey, thank you for your work and the team you've got in place. They work hours they don't get compensated for. They're incredible warriors on behalf of producers in this country. They're neighbors with those folks. They live next door to them, and the FSA offices that I've visited, the folks love what they're doing, and they go above and beyond what would normally be expected of a federal employee to make sure that to the extent they can, that our farmers and ranchers are getting access to these programs that Congress has put in. So please convey our thanks to them for their hard work and their continued hard work moving forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Chairman, would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
I need
Yes, sir.
30 seconds. I forgot to ask you, you created this new business center, apparently, now that's a process for hiring. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it now, the CED and the county committee for FSA, right, they used to be able to hire people there locally. But now, as I understand it, they send this to this business center. And there's one person here in D.C. that has to approve that before it's sent back to the county for them to hire somebody. You know, I mean, I don't think any of us here think it's a good idea to have Washington decide who should be hired in the local FSA office. So would you look into that?
Sure.
I mean, that's what I was told how it
The
worked.
decision is still made locally, and the state directors, state SEDs, have the authority to be able to decide what offices those go into as well. But we can
They
follow.
apparently fill in an electronic form, and that form gets sent to D.C., and then the person looks at it for uniformity, and if it's not uniform, they kick it out, and it doesn't go back to the county. So, I mean, I don't understand why we're letting somebody in Washington make decisions about who should be hired in a local county. That's what, so if you could give me an answer, appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Thompson.
Chairman, thank you so much, Mr. Undersecretary. Good to see you again. Thank you for your leadership and your service. Please certainly extend my appreciation to all the hard-working folks in USDA that are under your responsibility. Appreciate what they do. We obviously need our family farms depend on that level of professionalism to be able to connect them with the resources that, quite frankly, this committee makes available through our work with the Farm Bill authorizations and reauthorizations. I want to start out a little bit on dairy. You mentioned about 21,000 farms are signed up for the dairy margin coverage, which I think I read it was about 70% of the registered dairy operations. What is FSA doing specifically to ensure that the remaining operations are fully aware of the potential advantages to participate in the new program? And I appreciate the 1 week extension, obviously.
You bet. We've certainly got a lot of partners in reaching out to farmers. Last year, the sign up for the margin protection program was just a little over 21,000 as well. We're actually about 80 farmers short right now of where we were in sign up in 2018, with 2 days of sign up to go. So we think likely we'll end up by the end of this week, and certainly by the end of next week, at more sign up for this program than we did for MPP. But as you suggested in the question, there's other producers out there that have participated in the past. Maybe they're not in business, maybe they decided not to participate in this. Other producers that have dairy operations as well that are not participating. We're trying to reach out to those, make sure that they have choice, they understand the value of this program, how it works a lot better for our larger producers than it once did. It still ensures up to the 5 million pounds, but it works much easier for our larger producers. Certainly we have some small producers that historically have not participated, and we're making sure that we reach out to them. Phone calls, emails, postcards, everyone got at least 2 postcards over this sign-up period. They have been contacted through their marketing organizations as well, whether it's a co-op or they're part of an association. So we've worked with them all to reach out as well. So we've done all that we can. We will continue to do that the next week. We're hearing good reports that a lot of folks know. I assume we'll see a significant bump in the next couple days, but it's important still to be able to give folks another week to make sure that if they've lost track of the date, that we get a chance to be able to touch them one more time and get them in to be able to make that conscious choice.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
I think there's bipartisan support here. I don't know if you need a letter from us, but that flexibility, as I said in my opening comments, I think is important for the department to exercise. And so I think what you're saying is you're exercising that flexibility. But I think it's important, notwithstanding all the efforts you've made, that you indicate that you'll be entertaining to the end of the month or whatever time period makes sense.
Thank you.
Right now, we're announcing today that extension for 1 week. And so from the 20th to the 27th, we do have to watch about getting much later than that because we need to have sign-up start for the Dairy Margin Coverage Program for 2020. That first week of October, and we need to be able to get folks completed in this sign-up period. So that's our intention right now.
Yeah, and I think each of us have a responsibility as well. I know the month of August and it continues today. I take every opportunity, whether it's a Farm Bureau legislative session on a farm. I was at the All-American Dairy Show on Saturday in Harrisburg. About 2,400 head of cows there with kids showing them. The Dairy Summit, Secretary Perdue joined me for, just to encourage our farmers to sign up. This is a product that does work for everyone. It's affordable, and I appreciate it. The few seconds I have left, I'm not really looking for a response, but I do want to reach out to the department on our other big crop that I have in my district, and that's hardwoods. Our hardwoods have been hit hard with this tariff situation, yet there's been no relief. I think there's 2 things. We need to look at, first of all, we need to get these tariff deals done. That's the priority. But if anything extends for any period of time and there's a second round, we got to look at how we help these hardwoods. They have been at the tip of the spear of losses. And for those that in the business that have contracts on our national forests or Army Corps of Engineer lands, one of the simple solutions is just to extend the contracts they may have for another 24 months because they're being forced to harvest when the market, they're harvesting at one level and their market's not there. So, but that's something I'll follow up with the appropriate folks with USDA on. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
I now recognize the chairman of the Livestock Subcommittee, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening comments, I don't really believe anyone wins trade wars because I think everybody has leverage. And I think whether it's as a part of their strategy or for political reasons, certainly the Chinese recognize that. And the leverage they've chosen to use in not buying U.S. agricultural products has really hurt farm country. And of course, at any point in time, and I think the President's correct, the Chinese have been bad actors, and this has been for 20 years, both as it relates to industrial, theft, as copyright issues, and even when we've won in the World Trade Organization, they haven't complied. They've been bad actors, and that was recognized in the Obama administration and the Bush administration before that. There's been different strategies using to try to deal with it. Certainly they can buy more agricultural products because they need them and they have the money. But this is part of a strategy. You're not the trade ambassador. I don't hold you to that responsibility. But let me just tell you, when we're talking about California specialty crops and $50 billion a year ag industry in California, of which 44% more or less is dependent upon trade, it's hurting hard throughout the country, but especially in California. Pistachios, almonds, beef, citrus, table grapes, walnuts, plums, cherries, avocados face now over 50% tariffs on exports to China. The California Walnut Commission estimates that their industry will lose nearly $100 million annually due to the Chinese trade dispute. And meanwhile, California farmers, to my numbers that we've come up with, have received about $80 million in total payments in the first market facilitation program. You know, that doesn't cut it. I mean, you can go down the list. 3 cents a pound for almonds, 6 cents a pound for cherries. I mean, we think we've lost about 30 cents a pound on the almond market. You know, 3 cents doesn't come close. I talked earlier about the 12 cents per hundredweight on dairy. Nationwide, the dairy industry estimates that they've lost more than $2.3 billion in revenue since the trade war began, and they've received about $200 million in the first round. Beyond these losses, we're losing market share, as I said earlier, to our competitors, and those relationships are tough to rebuild after, hopefully, we get past this. So while I mentioned it's not your job to negotiate the treaties, the President said that he was making farmers more than whole, and the farmers are doing better than if China were buying. As I said, California farmers disagree with that. Mr. Undersecretary, do you agree with the President? Will a second round of trade aid make farmers more than whole? And are they better off with this than they would be with access to China's market or other markets?
I think everybody's working for a better trade situation, not only for the products we were exporting, but the products that we were struggling to export. That's where the real gain will be. Our market facilitation program was a bridge to get to that. It is certainly hard in that market facilitation program to deliver exactly what a producer lost.
Well, it's not possible.
It's not.
No, I mean, you know,
but it's
$16 billion, is that the current number with the two programs so far, or it's going to increase?
14.5 billion for the...
And you're spreading that around the whole country and in the Midwest, and you're talking about sorghum and wheat and corn and important commodities. I mean, the California ag industry is $50 billion. You just try to spread $16 billion across the country, and you talk about different states. You know, I mean, I know farmers don't want subsidies. We've gone through this a whole lot over the last 20 years of farm programs. They want access to markets. They want level, fair trade. And with 44% of California's agriculture dependent upon trade, I mean, it's the reason we need to get this USMCA agreement completed, I think, because it's so important to our country as well as to our neighbors to the north and to the south. So what's the implementation going to be on this next round?
So we are still getting signed up for this participation in this program up until December 6th. We have told all producers that the first 50% of this second round of MFP is guaranteed. We'll look to see whether the second and third payments are needed. If we get a trade deal, then we will reevaluate. We certainly hope that we get a trade deal before this.
But it doesn't make up for the loss of the markets?
No.
Okay.
Well, it certainly is a support for producers. It's important to be able to have something, and I think it's a recognition by the administration how important trade is to agriculture. And I think it's a great reminder and an appreciation for the role of trade and why there needs to be an active participation in trying to get to that trade deal that's better on the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now recognize the ranking member of the Livestock Committee, Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Undersecretary, thank you for being here with us today. And I, too, want to commend the entire team at USDA and all those FSA employees out there that are working really hard, as well as all the other employees at USDA. They do a lot of very, very important work very, very well, and in many cases with limited resources, too. So I want to focus in on the Disaster Relief Act, roughly $3 billion. Those of us in the Southeast worked really, really hard, including my friend here to my left, Mr. Scott, on getting this disaster relief package across the finish line. What do you expect to pay for the losses in 2018? Do you have an estimate of what that's going to consume? And then follow up to that is how much of that money do you think is going to be block granted to the states? If you can talk about your plans and thoughts on that as well.
It's a challenge to estimate what actual losses were, as we did in 2017 as well. I think certainly it's likely between $500 million and $1 billion in losses that occurred from the hurricanes in 2018. We know that there was some coverage that was covered by crop insurance, but this is to top up some of the crop insurance losses as well as to try and cover some of those other losses. For block grants, we're still in discussions with the states as they continue to bring forward their thoughts and what block grants should cover. As you all outlined in the disaster bill too, this isn't designed to top up existing programs. This is designed to cover those things that are not covered in existing disaster programs or in WHIP itself, and so maybe timber and other kinds of things. So we're still in conversations. It'll be in the several $100 million range, but it'll depend what their proposals are and what they conclude those losses are. And then, of course, the real proof is when you go out to the producers and how many producers have losses and are interested in signing up. So we don't have a set number of what that dollar amount will be. Certainly, it's going to be very important to many of the producers.
Follow up to that, when a producer goes in and he files his application, how long do you think it's going to take to turn that around?
Well, it depends how complex that application is, and we already have some producers that have completed applications. So in some cases, it's fairly straightforward. They have the information from their crop insurance, information last year, and so they're able to complete it very quickly. In other cases, we have producers that have not participated in farm programs before, and so they have to establish their eligibility first. They have to go get some of that information, and so there's other additional challenges for some producers out there. They don't have acreage reports to be able to look at history and to compare history to what the losses were in that year. So for the most part, we think it's going to be fairly quick for most producers, but there will be some of the applications that'll be more complex or cover things that have more questions and require more information from the producer.
What about the timing of the payment, though? Once that application is complete, everything's done correctly, et cetera, are we looking at a month or 2 weeks or 2 months?
Once we get, right now, we're still making some final changes in software on that payment mechanism, so that should start pretty soon. And once a producer completes that application, it should be certainly within 2 weeks that they would be able to get a payment for that application, and hopefully less than that.
Just for your awareness, and I don't know necessarily that this is widespread, but I've gotten some feedback from producers that when they go to the FSA office, they're told that they have absolutely no idea what they're going to be eligible for, and maybe that's just a situation as it relates to the application process itself. But you know, producers walk out of there pretty dejected when they don't have any idea, and they're told, you know, they're not sure what they're going to be able to receive. So I don't know if that's an education issue in some of these offices where the employees have not been brought up to speed on exactly what's entailed in the disaster program. But I have heard that, so I just want to make you aware.
But I'd love to be able to hear about those cases and where we can get more information out. For the most part, many of the places where that program is being implemented is around hurricanes, and we're areas that are very familiar with the software, since we're using very similar to software and criteria that we used in the 2017 program. For many cases, we have a lot of folks that had some experience implementing that program as well before, but then we've been able to have training. We sure love to find out if there's some places that we've missed that we need to be able to get more touch to some of our employees out there. But we have both online, in-person training, train the trainer as well. And we need to make sure that it is such that when a producer comes in, they have a competent, capable, and interested person across the counter to be able to help them walk through that application.
My office will follow up with you on that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Hayes from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Undersecretary, for being here. So I represent Connecticut, and my questions are specifically about our dairy farmers. We have about 80,000 working acres of dairy farms, which account for about 4,000 jobs, so much smaller than some of the other districts that we've heard about, but I think that's the cause for so much of the concern in my community. In 2018, in Connecticut, we had 110 licensed dairy farmers, and as of Monday, when my staff checked, only 66 of those farms had applied for the dairy margin coverage. So for a program that's guaranteed to provide, protection and supports in those margins, why do you think enrollment's not higher?
I don't know in those cases. Certainly outreach has been tried. In some cases, I don't know how Connecticut specifically compares to what its sign-up was for MPP a year ago. And whether there are some producers that choose not to participate. There are certainly groups of producers that choose not to participate in any program at all. I again, don't know specifically in Connecticut. I was on a beautiful dairy farm, modern, wonderful dairy farm in Connecticut a few months ago. I know we have been reaching out to producers, both by postcards and emails and phone calls, to be able to let producers know about it. We have another week to be able to reach out to folks if there's reasons, and if you hear of reasons or producers that have not been contacted or not aware. We certainly want to be able to make sure that they're aware and understand. This is a great program. This is a program that's going to be very constructive. Right now, we know they will actually make money in 2019 because of that. But most importantly, in the long term, this is a great risk management program for a small amount of money. For the future, a producer can know that they have a protected margin in that program. And so we're seeing about half the producers sign up for 5 years of the program, a little short of half of the producers. And certainly many of the folks that have signed up for previous programs are signed up. We continue to lose some dairy farms in all parts of the country. So compared to the long ago history, we have less participation than what we have in some of those producers with historical production. In some cases, some of them we're not able to stay in business, and we think we've reached out to all the folks.
Well, we've
we're
seen
glad
that
to continue
in
to do
Connecticut.
that. Pardon?
We've seen it in Connecticut that some of these farms have gone under and they're not able to stay in production. And I agree with you that this is a great program. But as I'm hearing you talk about just ways of outreach, I know in my district specifically, in Connecticut 5, broadband is tremendously unreliable. So if we're using email as a method to communicate with people, I know on my staff, we've gone out, we've done roundtables, I've met with farms. I would have loved to have joined you on a farm just to really be face-to-face and talk to people and say, this is what's available, because I fear that people are missing out on the opportunity because they don't know that it exists. So if there's anything that I guess members of Congress can do to help you, because it sounded like when the chairman asked about, have you asked for increased staff, it didn't sound like a hard yes, but I think that's something that we would all be willing to support, because I know it's life and death for my community, that there's people on the ground to assist them in the process. So if there's anything that we can do, I think I would love to engage in that process, because I think that when we have these large conversations, the small farmers feel left behind and are afraid of what the next step is or where they fall in this conversation. So I think it's critically important. You know, I know we go to the places where there are the most people and we make the most impact, but farming covers all communities, as you well know.
Absolutely, and thank you and many members have done a great job in their own communication out to constituents, as well as mentioned at public events. Reminded folks, we'll give folks another week, another opportunity to be able to remind them that the deadline is a week from tomorrow.
Have you used public radio?
We've used radio, and we've had our staff.
Because my farmers love the radio.
Okay, yeah.
No, well, my farmers, your farmers too, I'm sure. Yeah. But the radio is, I communicate with them a lot. Right. And I know I send out mailers, and people don't really read them. So I'm just thinking of anything that we could do to make sure the information is shared.
Yeah. We're glad to continue to reach out and do whatever we can to make sure that people hear about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now recognize Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I suppose my friend and colleague Congressman Bishop's district probably had more ag losses from 2018 than I did, but I believe that I'm second of the 435 members of the House with regard to the losses from storms for 18. We know the old saying, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. Certainly we recognize that's the case in agriculture. The payment for WHIP, the upper payment limit was reduced from $900,000 to $250,000 for the 2018 storms. It was $900,000 for 17. Can you tell me why that reduction was made, just briefly?
Yeah, I think certainly in discussions, both internal as well through across government, we had several conversations looking at how many folks would hit payment limits, as well as managing the dollars, recognizing that there's a limited number of dollars to be able to cover not only losses in 2018 and losses up to now in 2019, but for the balance of 2019 as well. We don't know what further losses might be.
Absolutely, and that brings me to the second point, and forgive me, on a 5-minute clock, I want to move fairly quick. We put $3 billion in. That $3 billion was for the 2018 storms, and just for the other members' knowledge, now that the 2019 storms are going to be paid out of that $3 billion amount that was allocated for 2018, can you tell me how much you estimate the 2019 losses to be?
Well, I think we're all going to agree here, no more hurricanes, right? No more disasters, but as you say, it's balance of 2019 up until now and going forward as well.
What are the losses to date?
To be paid
out of
we haven't
$3 billion?
had a large number of losses to date.
We had the Midwest floods.
What's that?
The Midwest floods, do we not have an estimate on that
Much
yet?
of the Midwest floods, the actual coverage will be through crop insurance, either prevent plant through crop insurance or other crop losses through crop insurance. So we'll see a few payments going there, but most of it will be, most of the WHIP payments will go to hurricane areas.
So there is almost $1.5 billion left over from the 2017 disaster payments, is that correct?
There is.
So just for the committee's knowledge, I have asked that the 2017 money be appropriated for the storms of 18 and 19. Forgive me, Mr. Secretary, I know I'm moving fairly fast. I have a lot of things I want to bring to your attention. The USDA gave an estimate on November the 29th of 2018 of the total losses for 2018 to date. The USDA requested a total of $1 billion. for Alabama, California, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. We have not seen any updated estimates for the 2018 storms. Are you aware of any updated estimates from your economist for 2018 since November 29th of 2018?
I'm not, and if there have been, I have not seen what a number would be.
I'm not either, and that concerns me greatly. And I, again, apologize for moving so fast, but for example, and I have the breakdown by commodity group, by state, your economist, USDA's economist, said that the Georgia cotton loss was $260 million. Indemnity estimate was $111 million, and $148 million would end up as the net uninsured loss. According to our ag institutions, the University of Georgia, the land grant institutions, and their economists, while you've got $260 million in that slot, we show it as $550 million. I can go down to pecan trees. You show it as $70 million. We show it as $260 million. Again, these are land grant institution economists that we have provided this information to the USDA and asked for updated estimates on what the losses are. My concern is when Congressman Bishop and I were arguing for the $3 billion for the storms, we had the information from the land grant institutions, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and we could not get the USDA to move off of the $1 billion request. We effectively forced it, if you will, to the $3 billion. And to this date, almost a year later, and my farmers have not received any payments yet from the storm, as you know, not your fault at all. But I don't understand why the estimates have not been updated from November of last year when we know they're not accurate. And I quite honestly think the $3 billion will end up falling very short of what the actual losses were. I'm talking about uninsured losses were for the 2018 crop year. Now we're taking 2019 storms out of it, while at the same time we've got $1.5 billion sitting over there in a lockbox that can't be touched. So any help from the administration in moving that 2017 money into whatever we do in a continuing resolution or appropriations process so that it can be used for the 18 and 19 storms. It's money that's already been appropriated. It just can't be used. But I'm very concerned. I appreciate you. I appreciate your experience in agriculture. I am concerned with the USDA's economist estimates. I'm concerned, and I would suggest that this committee, this cannot take a year the next time somebody goes through a storm the way the state of Georgia did. My people would not be farming today but for a loan program through the Georgia Development Authority that Governor Deal and the state legislature did in a special session, and then Brian Kemp and our state legislature came back in and put more money in it, and they should not have to do that. But for them, my people would not be farming today. And I look forward to the updated estimates from USDA's economists. Thank you, sir.
I now recognize Mr. Cox from California.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Great to have you here today, Undersecretary Northey. I have a question regarding the PEMA Competitiveness Program. And as you know, that PEMA cotton's not eligible for the traditional Farm Bill safety net programs. And one of the Farm Bill provisions important to many California cotton producers is the extra long staple, the ELS, or the PEMA Competitiveness Program. And just like the majority of farmers and ranchers in my district, cotton producers are being hardened by the trade war with China, resulting in naturally lost markets and pretty quickly declining market prices. My office and others have been working with the USDA and the cotton industry to make some needed updates to the PEMA program, which the Secretary heard about from some growers in my area during his recent visit to California a couple months ago. But it's my understanding that the needed changes to the program are being held up by the OMB. So what can you and the Secretary do to help us get this done, and how can this committee be helpful? our Pima growers are suffering, and with their cropping currently being harvested, we need those program updates as soon as possible.
Appreciate that. I'm restricted from conversations about what activity is at OMB and the actual proposals, but we continue to evaluate the inclusion of other varieties within that formula that would potentially impact the support through that program.
Okay. Anything that this committee could be doing ourselves?
I think continue to provide information about why there should be adjustments to that program from the point of view of your producers, I think is always valuable.
Okay. Then I have a question regarding the dairy margin coverage program, and organic dairy farms are also eligible for the program. And I'd like to hear about any specific outreach you've done to reach this section of the industry.
We've reached out to all sorts of trade groups and trying to be able to reach out to their producers. And we certainly can get you the information about what our touch has been specifically to organic dairy producers. But I think their associations have been involved as well. And their marketers have been involved in reaching out to their producers, recognizing that they qualify for that program as well. So we can get information about what has gone out. I'm not personally as familiar with each of those outreach efforts. But
okay, that's all I have, and I'll yield my time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I now yield to Mr. Marshall. Mr. Hagedorn. Sorry. Now yield to Mr. Hagedorn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary, nice to see you again. I'd just like to focus just a little bit on the market facilitation program. And some of the farmers out there, especially in southern Minnesota, have questions, and I know you've answered this in the past, but I thought maybe it'd be good to revisit it, as to why maybe people in counties in my district are receiving $60 or $70 per acre, whereas in other parts of the country it could be upwards of maybe $150 an acre. And it can vary based on zip codes and counties, and it could be neighboring counties getting different numbers for the same crops. Could you just maybe go over that a little bit again and help us with that and how the calculations were made?
I can. Thank you, Congressman. The formula that was figured out, as you remember, we established the criteria for the market, the payment for the market facilitation program during planting. So we wanted to be able to not incent the growing of one crop versus another. So that's why we went to a county payment rate for whatever a producer was planting. They would get the same payment rate. And we would not influence those planning decisions. But then we had to figure out what that payment rate would be. And we looked at those crops that were grown in each of those counties and how those crops were being impacted by the trade. Some crops are being impacted by the trade tariffs to a greater degree than others. They, in some cases, export more of their product. In some cases, export more of it to China, where we've had some issues. So it's, obviously in the first round, you saw some difference between corn and soybeans because they're impacted differently. Certainly cotton is one of those that is impacted greatly. Some of the other products are impacted to a greater or smaller degree.
Sure.
So what ends up in that final payment is the mix of the crops that are grown in that county and the impact on the value of those crops based on the loss of the markets to both tariffs and historical non-tariff barriers as well. The chief economists looked back over the last 10 years to be able to look at when we had higher trading years and what non-tariff barriers might have been added through the years as well. And so the difference is there are some places where the average acre in that county, which is the mix of acres in that county, have a higher impact per acre than others in other counties.
I appreciate you clearing that up again. I know these subjects that I'm about to bring up don't necessarily directly impact you, but you have some fine folks behind you that you all go back and talk to the Secretary and report to the White House and others. And what's been going on in farm country for 5 and 6 years with the low commodity prices, high input costs, it's tough, and it's having a cumulative effect as we go through the trade negotiations. There have been some good things done, and I think people miss that. Regulatory reform, the things that the administration's taken on with some of the folks up here on the Hill, that's been excellent. Getting rid of that high-cost energy and having U.S. energy independence, which is important to agriculture. The tax reform bill was good for our farmers. Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, that's really crushed them, and we need to do better there and get that down. But on trade, my message is this. They understand China has been cheating and we have to do something. But they really want it solved as fast as possible. And I know that you're working on it, and the trade rep and the president and everybody else is committed to that. And so we just continue to encourage to get a result as fast as possible. It's good for the whole country. And secondarily, on biofuels, you know, I think you got to keep working in that area. I know they're looking at making some announcement, hopefully in the near future, whether it's buying back the gallons. But we need that program implemented the way the Congress intended. Can't let the bureaucrats and others decide that they're going to reinterpret the statutes. We should be following the law of the land, and I hope we can get that worked out because it's critically important for our corn and soybean farmers in southern Minnesota. And lastly, this is just something to make sure that you stay apprised of, stay on. This African swine flu, that's really crushed things in China, maybe half their hogs. Obviously, demand for soybeans would be down. We can't have that here. And I know you're working hard. The whole department is to make sure that we keep it out of the United States, keep it out of North America. But that would be devastating to farmers in an array of areas. And so I appreciate your attention to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now recognize Mr. Vandrew.
Thank you, Chairman. And welcome, Undersecretary. It's good to see you. I am from southern New Jersey, which is a lot different than northern New Jersey. When Secretary Perdue was before the full committee in February, he told us he didn't think a second round of trade payments would be necessary or likely. But we obviously are in the midst of a second round. So I'd want your opinion. Do you think at this point, from what you hear from the people you speak to, because, you know, you're going to have to be ready, do you think a third round of payments is likely at this point?
Well, I'm still hoping that the second and third payments of the second round are not necessary because we're back to a better trade environment in the short term. So right now we're focused on being able to make these payments now for producers. I did not believe there was a likelihood of a second round. I thought it sounded to me that we were very close to an agreement, and that certainly would have been preferable for everybody. But when an agreement could not be reached, it was important to be able to stand up for the producers, be able to support producers.
Of course, I agree.
Time. So I don't know.
I just hope you had some inside info.
No.
There are significant differences between the 2018 Market Facilitation Program, the MFP, and the 2019 edition of the FMP. Most notable, the approach towards how payments are calculated, which is based on actual production last year, but this year is on a per-acre basis. Can you offer the rationale or the reasoning or the decision-making why that was done?
Great question. So in 2018, we established the Market Facilitation Program going into harvest when we would be very close to be able to have harvest numbers and we could look at actual production as producers could bring that information in to their FSA office and be able to provide that information. As we looked at 2019, we looked at a crop that was growing or in some cases not even planted yet. We wanted to make sure and not influence that planting decision. So we needed to be able to have a producer that was considering between two crops just look at what the market asked for, not look at a market facilitation program payment, which would have been different in the first time around if we had instituted that in 2019. So we wanted to go to an acre payment to be able to provide that continuity and yet predictability that there was support for producers that were impacted by the trade situation in 2019. And so that's why we went to the acre payment in 2019. Certainly one of the criteria for both programs was to make it pretty straightforward for a producer to be able to come up with the information that they needed to comply, make it as straightforward as possible for our offices as well to be able to deliver it, because we were adding that onto the work that was being done in our offices and the work that the producer needed to go through. And I think both met that test, even though they were delivered differently because they were delivered at different times of the production year.
And you believe by using that combination, varying on the circumstances, you achieve the maximum accuracy?
I think so. It's a challenge to be able to predict what market impacts are of trade disruptions. I think the chief economist did a great job of being able to analyze that, get the information back. Certainly there will always be disagreements of whether that was enough or not, or whether it was balanced the right way. But I think we did, and then I think to be able to deliver it the way that we did also minimize the disruptions that the payment could have caused if we'd gone commodity by commodity payment.
Okay. This trade aid has created a situation, as you know, where some farmers are getting direct payments while others, like a lot of fruit and vegetable growers, particular to my area, have to hope that the USDA's purchase of their products will be large enough to move their whole market. Can you share why some of the commodities that were impacted by the trade war received MFP payments while others received purchases?
As we looked at the commodities that were being impacted, you could look at certainly some of the specialty commodities that were being impacted. Some of them we could replace that demand by creating new demand, by buying them and having them offered through food banks. Hopefully that even creates additional customers in the future. In other commodities, that wasn't possible, or we couldn't supply enough. If it was dairy or pork, we did do some purchases, but we also needed to make some direct payments. Of course, we didn't have any way with the larger commodities, cotton or corn or soybeans, to be able to offer purchase and have a place for those all to go. So it made sense to be able to use the purchases wherever it could make sense to be able to offer that through other outlets, hopefully creating additional customers, and then provide direct payments to those that we're not able to provide purchases to.
The gentleman's time is
Thank you, Mr.
expired.
Undersecretary.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Undersecretary. Thank you for being here today. We've already heard a lot about the situation in Georgia with the disaster and crops being in direct path of the hurricane and the losses from infrastructure and just communities just devastated. It took a long time, but we now have a disaster relief package, and through this process, I continue to hear from my constituents not only the need for immediate disaster assistance, but also the concerns of fixing the problems they experienced when signing up for the previous WHIP program. To this, Mr. Undersecretary, what has FSA done to ensure that the new WHIP Plus program is being implemented effectively and efficiently throughout all the local FSA offices?
As we have made sure that our staff is well trained in the program, we've made some IT improvements as well in the way that the program operates, including the payment mechanism being hooked directly to the program mechanism, so that allows a little more efficiency in the offices. It is a challenge for producers when we're looking at individual losses, and that's the way this program was designed, to be able to look at individual losses. If you and I are across the fence from each other and you suffered a 60% loss, I suffered a 40% loss, and yet we're in the same neighborhood, we will pay based on the relative loss. And that requires a certain amount of paperwork. Often that information is already available from the crop insurance records. Again, that loads fairly quickly into the WIP program.
Okay.
Where we end up...
Can you define relative loss? I mean, how does,
Pardon?
how does relative loss work? When are you balancing out the losses across a certain area, or how does that work?
We take each individual operations loss. So we don't take a regional loss. We take an individual operations loss, and then we take into account what that operation received for crop insurance payments as well. Then we have a formula to be able to have a higher amount coverage than crop insurance, but never more than what a full guarantee for crop insurance would have been.
Right.
No producer in this case is, even with these payments, is going to be better off than they would have been had they had a crop, especially those producers that had a really good crop coming, and we had that in some cases. They'll only be insured, or they'll only be covered, or we only compare against what their expected normal crop would have been.
And I understand this became available last Wednesday, is that correct?
It did, yes.
Okay.
Yes, the
And,
11th.
and you did comment about the software, and when will the software be readily available to the FSA offices?
It's out there now, and
Is it?
they're working. We've seen some applications back.
Right.
Certainly, if you hear any different, I'd love to be able to hear about that, but
Okay.
it's out there working. We had it available for folks. We are not now yet for those first operations making those payments. That'll occur within the next few weeks.
Right.
Once that happens, then we'll start making payments as soon as.
In addition to the WIP Plus program, I worked tirelessly to secure disaster assistance for our blueberry growers who suffered losses in the 2017 late season freeze. When do you think that the provision that was included in the disaster relief package made available funds through expanded coverage of the previous 2017 WIP package, when do you think we'll see, when will growers expect to receive this, and how will this be distributed?
Yeah, that sign-up started last week as well, so that
Okay.
started on the 11th as well. So I assume we have producers that, as soon as they're aware of that, are coming in the office. Again, that's using the 2017 program, so the 2017 software, payment limits, other things of 2017, and that's already available. And we should have producers certainly, possibly signing up for that program right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of the trade situation, you know, when Secretary Perdue came to his first hearing here, I said then, you know, farm income was down 55%. And this was before we ever got into trade negotiations. And I said, what are we going to do about these low commodity prices? And he said, we got bad trade deals. And so, you know, I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, you know, lots of people have been impacted by these negotiations, but then again, I think the reason that we have terrible trade deals is we have an election in this country every 2 years, and people who are in public service don't want to take the risk of, you know, trying to fix these things. And so this president's taking it on, and I just pray that we can get a quick resolution to this thing and have a fair free trade, because our farmers can compete with anybody in the world.
Yeah. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa, Congresswoman Exney. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and ranking members. Thank you for the opportunity to join this joint subcommittee hearing on disaster recovery. And thank you, Undersecretary Northey, for being here. You know it's always great to see you. As a fellow Iowan, you know as well as I do how devastating severe flooding can be and how long the recovery process can take for our communities. Southwest Iowa, as you know, is still reeling from the massive flooding that occurred this past spring. Entire towns such as Hamburg and Pacific Junction in my district went completely underwater and have been estimated to lose billions of dollars in damages and, of course, agricultural losses throughout Iowa. But we all know that risk isn't over. In fact, western Iowa is currently experiencing another round of potentially severe flooding. I've been closely monitoring the situation and spoke with emergency management coordinators last night. But the current situation further underscores the urgency of what we're talking about here today. And when I traveled the district, and you and I have worked on this together, and saw the damages in the spring, of course, what I was impressed with is the resiliency of Iowans. Of course, we didn't wait for the government to come in and do the job. We got to work themselves, and they helped one another start that really difficult and long road to recovery. Church congregations were putting out meals for those who didn't have one. Neighbors helped muck out each other's basements, and farmers, of course, donated hay to each other to have for their cattle to graze. But the bottom line is that while Iowans got to work, we need to ensure that the federal government does its job. I heard from a lot of Iowans that said they didn't know what resources were out there, what the deadlines were, and how they could sign up. As you know, I invited this past June Leo Edelman, a producer from my district, to testify before a subcommittee hearing, and he told us about the challenges that he and others are facing in obtaining the necessary information and resources throughout the flood recovery process. So I'm grateful that the President was quick to declare a disaster emergency and that Congress was able to pass our disaster supplemental. However, it's very clear to me that we need to do a better job of providing a streamlined set of processes and procedures that can go into effect immediately following a disaster. And we have both talked about this issue. So I have some specific questions that I hope that the USDA can help us with. Undersecretary Northey, I know you have long experience with flood recovery in Iowa in the Secretary of Agriculture during our floods of 2008 and 2011. We worked together when I was part of the Sustainability Task Force to address that in 2008. Do you agree that it's important for the USDA to have prompt and effective communications with those that are affected by flooding?
I certainly do, and it is a challenge. They're often very busy doing other things. Sometimes even the communication tools are down, whether it's internet or phones or other things. And so it is a challenge to be able to communicate with folks. So we have to be even more aggressive in letting them be able to have easy access to that information.
And during your tenure at the USDA, what steps have you taken to improve USDA's communication to farmers affected by floods?
So we do extra outreach and training for staff that find themselves in a disaster situation. Often, sometimes in that area, some of those folks have dealt with emergency conservation program before and other programs that help clean up after a flood or pick up debris or rebuild fences. But in some cases, we have folks that have not been experienced with that. So sometimes we'll send in jump teams as well from other areas to bring into those areas. They will have their experience in what outreach work, be able to go to community organizations, work with those existing outreach, even through churches, but certainly through extension agents and cooperatives and other business partners out there that can help us reach out to producers. So many different ways. We're looking at trying to do the same thing on the NRCS side and providing maybe even almost more of a permanent jump team that can come in from outside to be able to help when we have disaster. In that case, it's the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, an infrastructure support program that is unique, that is different than our other tools, but we need people with experience, if possible, to be able to help folks locally implement those programs.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you talk about this jump team, because you and I have talked about some of the issues we face trying to get communication to folks who were kayaking into their homes, and we talked about mail was being sent to them. Well, obviously that doesn't work out, or the fact that folks didn't think we needed congregational meals because we hadn't requested them. That's because the cattlemen stepped in, Farm Bureau, et cetera. So last question, would you be willing to commit to work with my office on ways to help streamline that process and the communication between USDA and the folks on the ground?
Be very glad to.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
I thank the gentlewoman. Her time has expired, and we all are sympathetic about the challenges that states that have been subject to the flooding in the Mississippi River and the impacts that have created there have been hard hit those communities, and we appreciate your noting that and all the good work you're doing. The gentleman will now, the chair will recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Undersecretary Northey, it's great to have you back to the committee. You're doing a tremendous job at USDA, and I applaud Secretary Perdue and the team he's put together. So just wanted to say that and appreciate your good work and your friendship. Thanks. I don't need to tell you, and it's been mentioned several times today, about the flooding conditions and the terrible planting season that we had. In western Kentucky, I represent 4 counties on the Mississippi River, very small counties in geographic area. But one of the counties, Hickman County, had over 8,000 acres that didn't get planted in anything. And I know that was the case in many areas of the United States along the river. And because of the terrible planting season, you know, no doubt yields are going to suffer. Large amounts of acres weren't planted. And when the August crop production report came out, I think a lot of farmers were surprised at the reports that were projected on the fall harvest, and as a result, corn prices and other commodities went down quite a bit overnight. Can you describe what caused the differences in those reports, and also how farmers, grain elevators, and users of commodities can manage the price risk that they face in response to sudden changes in prices?
So it is a big challenge in a year like this, trying to get numbers right. We still don't yet know what the production levels will be out there. It partly depends on when the frost is and how much time there is for the rest of the season. We know it's uneven. The production across the country, we certainly know that we have a lot of prevent plant acres. Across the country, we normally get about 2 or 3 or 4 million acres that are prevent plant. This year, it's 19 million acres that are prevent plant across the country. I think as time has worked out, folks have looked at the acreage numbers. That was one of the concerns that folks had, and generally have believed that fairly represents the actual amount of corn acres out there. There's still a lot of discussion on what the production level should be. And I'm certainly not in the production prediction business. Right. We're there to be able to respond after that. But risk management tools, there's a lot of great ones. Through the companies, certainly crop insurance is one of the most important risk management tools that folks participate in. And then the revenue coverage has been very valuable producers, and we see high levels of participation in that.
Well, thank you. My next question and last question will be about hemp. I know that that's come up a couple times today, and as you know, when I was Commissioner of Agriculture, we were the first state, Kentucky, to implement a hemp program. It's been a huge success story. We have processors that are all over the state. Most of the newer ones are located in my congressional district. We're very happy about that, and it's just been a great success story. As we move forward, I know that Senator McConnell put language in the in Congress to require USDA to have hemp crop insurance, and I share Chairman Peterson's concerns about what that type of crop insurance product will look like. And I just wanted to mention 2 things, and I've had several discussions with people at USDA, but I just want to go on the record with 2 things that I hope that the final product looks like or doesn't have. For number one, I don't want a product that creates absolutely no risk for the farmers, which would encourage overproduction. I think that's the concern that Chairman Peterson and Ranking Member Conway have, as do I. And secondly, we don't want a product that's ripe for fraud. And I've always said that the best federal crop insurance product that would prevent fraud would be one that says you can only insure what you have a contract to sell, whether that's tobacco or hemp, because the overwhelming majority of farmers are honest. They utilize the crop insurance program. We need federal crop insurance program, but there are always a few bad actors here and there. And I don't want to see a situation where a farmer has a contract to sell 30 or 40 acres of hemp, but they plant 100 or 200 acres of hemp, because hemp's a very expensive crop to produce. So I just wanted to go on the record and express my concerns. I appreciate the work that you all are doing on industrial hemp. I know it's a lot to digest. We went through it in Kentucky, and you can put a bunch of zeros on it, and that's what you all are going through now at USDA. But anything that I can do or my office can do to work with you on that final product, as you know, we're more than willing to do that. But I do appreciate the work you're doing, and just wanted to express my concerns. And Mr. Chairman, I
The gentleman's
yield back.
time has expired, and your concerns are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will now recognize the gentleman from California who represents a great part of the California Central Coast, Congressman Panetta.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Thompson, and of course, Undersecretary Northey. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate not only your time today, your preparation for being here, but also your service. Thank you very much. As you heard, I come from the Central Coast of California, and in California, as you know well, we have a lot of agriculture, but unfortunately, we have some wildfires as well. Last year, the California delegation and I joined with my colleagues in sending a letter to the appropriators requesting that WIP include assistance for grape growers and other producers whose harvests were tainted by wildfire smoke at the smoke tank, as you know well. And I got to say, I was pleased to hear this year of reports that WIP Plus is getting off to a pretty good start. And I know that a lot of my wine grape growers in California have been, who were affected by last year's wildfires and the smoke taint, are actually pretty pleased with how it's been going. So that's good to hear. But as we continue to roll out WIP Plus and FSA offices continue to do that, are you in your agency taking any specific steps to reach out to farmers who have been tainted or impacted by the smoke taint to ensure that they're aware of the assistance that they might be eligible for through this program?
I believe that there is outreach. I don't know what that is, Congressman,
Okay.
and we certainly can make sure that that's true, and certainly be glad to work with you to make sure that we're working with the organizations, often, whether it's the wineries or others that can help us reach out to those producers. We want to make sure, since it has not been covered in the past in a sufficient way at all, that they are aware that there is now coverage for that.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. I appreciate that offer, and we will take you up on that. Another thing that we also have in California is obviously we have organic crops and specialty crops. And a lot of producers in my district, they face a lot of barriers utilizing the USDA's crop insurance options, including whole farm revenue protection and the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, NAP. Given that crop insurance and the participation by these farmers is limited to access disaster relief, are there any steps being taken by your agency to make sure that the crop insurance or NAP is more accessible to organic and specialty crop producers?
Certainly it's available, and we see some good participation, especially in specialty crops. Of course, NAP is available where there is not a crop insurance product for folks. And we see good participation in those specialty crop areas. Whole farm revenue protection is a great option for many of those farms with a diversified mix of crops that are hard to individually account for, but they can account for the revenue across that mix of crops. So we see participation. These are, and we certainly provide outreach to encourage folks to be a part of it. We're hearing that they're good tools for many producers, always looking at ways that they can be better tools for producers, but are a very important mix of our products for those producers who are not producing common commodities in other places.
Yeah, understood, and I appreciate your recognition of that. In regards to that, have you heard of, or are you implementing any sort of continuing education requirements or any training for producers to make sure that they understand exactly how this works?
We do provide outreach to producers and producer organizations. Certainly our staff is available to be at other meetings, to be able to share information as well, whether it's a grower meeting about something completely different. They can also, our staff will share information. We also, of course, this is delivered through private crop insurance agents, and those agents are often very active in the outreach that's done around those products as well. They will go ahead and service. They will be the ones that will make the connection, at least on whole farm revenue protection. The NAP is delivered through our FSA offices, and our county executive directors or others in that office will participate in some of those conversations at larger events, outreach, field days, other kinds of things.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Undersecretary. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair will now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, the Jayhawk State, Congressman Marshall.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Undersecretary, and thank you so much for being here today. I want to talk just for a second about high-quality alfalfa and the Dairy Margin Coverage Program. Now, if I know anything about farming, it's alfalfa. So grew up, my main job in the summers from age 14 to 18 was hauling hay, and I always really kind of didn't look forward to those alfalfa days because they were heavy bales, 90, 100 pounds, and I remember complaining to my grandfather about the weight of those bales, and he said, look, we grow high-quality alfalfa here, and those mama cows that are pregnant are going to love this high-quality protein they're getting. It's like molasses to them, and that's what got those cows through those hard winter days in Kansas. And as I understand it, that we're working on this new dairy margin coverage program, and the price of that type of alfalfa is a little bit more expensive. How is FSA integrating that information into the DMC formula? Is that going to help us have a more accurate reflect on the cost side of this equation?
It is. I grew up in Iowa baling small squares of alfalfa hay, but ours was beef quality hay, not dairy quality hay. So I certainly know the wonderful smell of alfalfa in the summer. We did include, as the Farm Bill suggested, we should look at the price of high quality hay and compare that to the average hay price that we were using in that dairy margin coverage formula before. So everyone's very familiar. You've got the milk price, and you subtract the feed cost, and the margin is what we're insuring. If that cost of feed by using dairy hay or high-quality hay is a little higher, your margin's a little narrower, and you will trigger a payment a little earlier. We did, after looking at that and seeing that there was an additional cost, we included in the hay portion of that feed cost 50% high-quality hay and 50% all hay price. And so that has narrowed the margin a little bit and allowed, I think, a more fair representation of what a dairy producer was actually seeing for their feed costs, and certainly I think makes it an even better tool for producers to be part of that dairy margin coverage program. We have seen times where that premium quality hay will jump in price because of a shortage. That was not being covered before. That is a partial compensation now for those producers, and I think that's an improvement of that program.
Well, great. Appreciate your efforts on that. And I want to talk about just the great job my FSA officers are doing back home. Now, maybe Kansans just don't complain as much as other states, but I'm not getting many complaints. And I want to shout out to my executive director and a good friend, David Shim, as well as all those other FSA officers. And as a producer myself, who interacts with those people once a year, I think they're doing an incredible job. They've already processed 112,000 applications for the market facilitation program. and 30,000 applications so far for the MFP payments for 2019. So I appreciate the great work that they are doing. And one of the things that they're starting to ask me questions about is updating the IT systems between Risk Management Agency and the Farm Service Agency, and the producer data can be shared across agencies. Can you give us an update on how that's coming along, the acreage crop reporting streamlining initiative, and a timeline when you think that might be available to producers?
And we continue to make progress there. It's to be able to allow information. Right now, we have producers that are able to certify their acres at Farm Service Agency and have that information automatically transfer into their crop insurance agent and vice versa. It's not where it needs to be in the longer term. And we are also looking at improving the overall acreage reporting process too. Right now, much of that is still paper-driven at the counter. So to be able to put this together in a better electronic form would make it an easier process for producers at the counter, but also potentially decrease the number of contacts a producer needs to be able to make, because we have the information at FSA and it can automatically go to a crop insurance agent. So we're making small steps. In the meantime, we're trying to get our programs out, and so we are looking to be able to make some bigger steps in the future.
Okay, quickly, last question has to do with WHIP, the Wildfire Hurricane Indemnity Program. Certainly we understand what it typically covers. One of the concerns of my producers is on-farm stored commodities. Yeah. And the other thing I'm hearing a lot about is pivots, the irrigation pivots underwater, 8-10 foot of water, and there's no type of coverage for them at a cost of several $100,000. And any thoughts on either of those?
So on-farm stored commodities that were impacted by flooding are being covered not within WHIP itself, but within the disaster program. So that startup that sign-up started last week as well. And so we have producers going in, just provide information about what a producer had for that stored commodity, whether it's hay or whether it's grain that has been lost, and we'll cover 75% of the loss of that.
Go ahead. You're done?
And for irrigation pivots, we have some pieces to be able to touch that. Typically, that has been covered through casualty insurance rather than through our disaster programs, but we have some pieces of EQIP in some cases, ECP in some cases, but mostly has been covered in regular casualty insurance.
The gentleman's time has expired. And the chair will now recognize the gentleman from South Dakota, Congressman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't start with a thank you. Of course, we've had a wet year. That's come out time and time again as we've been talking about disaster response. But, Bill, you were so good at being willing to have conversations with us earlier in the spring about moving that haying and grazing date for cover crop. USDA did it. I could tell it took some work on your end to get it done. But I mean, on behalf of South Dakota, thank you, because there are a lot of us who are a lot better off because of that flexibility that USDA showed, that leadership that you showed. So thank you. I want to talk about CRP sign-up. The last general sign-up for CRP was in the final days of the Obama administration. And from a South Dakota perspective, we only had a couple selected, even though there were thousands of applicants. And I think that was because EBI pushed acres away from traditional areas. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, about EBI, if any amendments or evolutions of that are needed, and if there are any particular piece of advice I should give my producers in South Dakota as they look toward the next CRP sign-up.
Well, right now we're scheduled for December for the next CRP sign-up. I think one of the additional challenges CRP had in the last sign-up is there are a few acres that were able to be accepted. The cap was very tight to the number of acres that were available. We'll likely see a lot more acres available this time around. We have expiring acres this year, and then for sign-up in December, since that starts in October of 2020, we'll have expiring acres in September 30 of 2020 as well. And so that's a large number of acres that expire at that time. So I think we'll see a lot larger sign-up than we've seen for many years. That'll provide certainly more room for many producers. I assume there'll be a lot of interest as well. The Environmental Benefits Index will be available to everybody. We're looking at making some adjustments. The next one will look just like this last one. So if there's concerns, certainly be glad to be able to hear that. I don't know some of the specifics on whether it targeted other areas. So certainly glad to be able to talk through that if there's some additional concerns on what that EBI will look like. But that Environmental Benefits Index will be available publicly, so each producer will be able to look at it and decide whether they want to plant a warm season or a warm season grass instead of a cool season grass or a native.
So when you talk about EBI being, the same, is it going to be the exact same mechanism, or will it be fundamentally the same?
It'll be fundamentally the same.
Okay. So now as we look at, because it's just been a record wet year, and good grief, we had some counties in South Dakota got another 8 or 10 inches last week. These folks just can't buy a break. Some of them have been into a number of years of prevent plant already. Of course, they know they need another option for that continuously wet ground. CRP, is that much of an option for them? Is there any kind of a preference that is given to prevent plant type acres for enrollment into CRP?
There's not a preference per se in looking back and seeing what was prevent planted the previous years, but it's certainly likely that those areas would qualify, especially for wetland program acres. And we have that through a floodplains wetland emergency watershed program that's out there. We have a wetland reserve program as well. And so sometimes connected directly to that general enrollment, but often connected in other ways. So I would encourage folks to go both to their FSA, but their NRCS office as well, and have those conversations if they have an area that they've lost to too much water for several years and they're thinking about that area is costing them too much to farm. There are some programs that will make good use out of that and good public areas for public benefit out of that they can retain ownership and be able to have some program participation in that.
Sure. Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just close by noting how good it feels to have somebody in this position who really understands what it's like to work hard outdoors, what it's like to have dirty hands, what it's like to sit down and try to figure out how do you run an operation with the kinds of really tight margins that modern production agriculture has. You're doing a good job, sir, in large part because you get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank the gentleman from South Dakota. There's a number of us who still actively farm, so I appreciate that. The last witness, and we will close the hearing following his 5 minutes, is the gentleman from California, who represents a nice part of Northern California, Congressman Doug LaMaffa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it, and for having this hearing today, so be able to go over these matters. And Undersecretary Northey, really appreciate you being here and the good work you're doing over there. So thanks. So I'll get through this because I think I'm just about last, huh? But just quickly on. We grow a lot of almonds in California, or almonds. We say almonds. I have to clarify for those from.
The old almond joke.
Yeah. I won't tell the joke. It's been done. But we still have an undistributed fund in the market facilitation program from last fall. There was $63 million that were set aside by USDA for almond producers. $25 million has been distributed, leaving it about 38 that hasn't been issued for various reasons, and some of it having to do with a particular level of record keeping and farm records that hadn't really been kept. And my understanding, you already have in place for 2019 a remedy for that. So we do appreciate that. The growers appreciate that. Is there a way to recapture for the 2018 crop the still undispersed $38 million and catch up on some of those needs that were still
So for our numbers, our projections of what our spending would be for 2018, There were certainly reasons, whether payment limits or AGI or other kinds of reasons, folks did not participate in that program. We have some that participated greater levels than what the dollars were, some at less. What we waited for is for folks to come in and apply, and we certainly had the dollars available to do that. It's not a set aside of a certain amount of dollars for a certain crop, and so I just encourage folks to come in and participate in this year's program. It's based on acres. It's certainly easier for some producers than a production-based program was for them, and certainly we look forward to having those folks all participate in this year's program.
Can we apply the acres test to the 2018 for those that didn't have the farm records on that basis, so we can, again, capture some of that was left behind for those losses?
We don't have any mechanism to go back and look at that, including Signup has closed on that, and we are not looking back at changing. I know it was a challenge to implement that program for lots of producers as well as for us.
Certainly in a time frame and such,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. But you would still encourage them to come in and apply, and maybe those records could be built or something that's found satisfactory.
The sign up for 2018 has closed, but for 2019 is now open until December 6th.
Okay, December 6th. Okay, thank you. Yeah. And then in the area of the PLC, price loss coverage, as it applies to rice and or others that are applicable, but and rice particularly, the crop year being what it is, producers may not receive a payment until November or December, even though the marketing year ends in the summer, in July, typically. What's being done to help with the timely issuance of payments to those producers, especially since the cash flow can be an issue for some?
So I don't know when the marketing year ends and when information is available. So typically for us to be able to make a ARC or a PLC payment, we need last year's production and the marketing year's average prices. So and we can check on rice and be glad to be able to work through that and be able to get that information to you. But I'm assuming the timing is as early as it can be, considering when we're able to get that information on production and price. If it can be earlier and we legally do it, we'd sure love to be able to do it. I assume that's why it's that way, but I don't know in particular on
fall, typically the harvest will end in early to mid-fall, and it wouldn't be too long after that. You'd have certified production amounts, and so it would seem that, that taken in context with the marketing of that crop the following year, we're just looking for ways to speed up that timeline for the PLC to be available, because again, cash flow is a problem with all that. It's basically a year behind. So, okay. Yeah. Is that something you think can be?
We certainly look at it. The price that we look at for PLC and ARC is the marketing year following that production. So often, just like the corn and soybean payments we'll make for ARC and PLC in October will be based on the prices from last harvest until this summer, late this summer, this fall.
Does it have to be the entire crop have that done, or is it going to be more on an individual farmer basis, or?
It's the entire crop, the average for the crop, not for the producer. Right. But I still will have to, Mr. Congressman, I have to check on rice. I'm less familiar with the mechanics of rice, and if there's something that we can do in a more timely way,
be happy to have that. Thank you, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. If you could please get back not only on the other commodities to the gentleman, but to the committee as well. I think that would be appreciated.
I'd be very glad to.
All right. I think we've come to a close, but before we adjourn, I'd invite Ranking Member Thompson to make any closing remarks that he may desire.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you for this hearing. I appreciate the fact that our two subcommittees came together very timely. Secretary Northey, thank you. we work really hard on this committee to make sure we're doing the right things by American farm families, and I think that's evidenced by the programs that we put forward and authorized within the Farm Bill. And so I just take great confidence to have somebody with your background, your experience, and quite frankly, your competency executing those programs. And so thank you for what you've done, and I yield back.
Well, we thank the ranking member of the subcommittee, and I know I speak for Congressman Vella. We do appreciate the efforts to bring both subcommittees together for this important hearing today, and our staff who worked hard to put this together as well for both subcommittees. I will now recognize my subcommittee's ranking member, Mr. Rausser, for any closing comments he might like to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Undersecretary, I too thank you for being here. We appreciate the work that you and the many great employees all across USDA do, and certainly appreciate your attention to the detail of implementation of our disaster assistance programs. That's just so critically important. This is a very fragile time, very precarious time for many in production agriculture, particularly those that have been forced to endure multiple natural disasters. For example, in my district, we had Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and then followed up by Hurricane Florence in 2018. And then low commodity prices on top of that for an extended period of time as well. So it has been probably one of the most challenging times in agriculture, throughout, the country in general, but specifically for these areas that have been hit so hard by our natural disasters. So really appreciate your time and attention and follow through on that, and look forward to continuing to work with you to address those needs. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
All right, the gentleman yields back, and Undersecretary Northey, we appreciate the time that you spent this morning with both subcommittees and the testimony that was given and the questions that you answered. Clearly, if there's any follow-up, both subcommittees will reach out to you and the department. We thank Secretary Perdue. As was noted by almost every member, I believe, it is tough times in farm country. And regionally, you look across the country, and from a combination of natural disasters that have taken place almost in every region of the country, to commodity prices that have been impacted by a lot of factors, including this trade war that is taking place. American farmers, ranchers, dairymen, and women are trying to struggle to survive. And clearly, as I say everywhere I go, food is a national security item. A lot of folks take it for granted. Nobody does it better than the American farmer every day, putting food on America's dinner table at the most highest quality and at the most cost-effective price anywhere in the world. And we do it so well we can produce more than we can consume, and therefore the trade issues are critical. But the fact of the matter is that we must remind ourselves that with less than 5% of the nation's population directly engaged in the production of food and fiber, that this is a critical issue for all Americans. And we must do everything we can to ensure that we provide stable markets, to ensure that all of the American agriculture can make it through these difficult times, because, as we know, nobody does it better than the American farmer. So I will close this hearing. The record for today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive any additional material and supplemental written responses from witnesses to any question posed by a member. And at this point, this joint hearing is now adjourned. Thank members of both subcommittees.